Hey Mateo,
What's up, dude?
are you familiar with dogs?
I've had a few.
Have you ever heard of a man? Do you know what a man is?
I try to be one.
What about dogmen? What do you know about them?
I know it's the new name for werewolf.
No, it's not, Mateo. Dogmen are old and ancient, and they lived millions of, not really millions of years ago, but they lived a long ass time ago, and they fought people and they ate people, and they were dog people. Did you know that, Mateo? They're not goddamn werewolves.
Not wolf people, but dog people.
Dog people.
Dog people. Dog people. Dog people. Dog. Dog people. Dog people. Dog people. Dog people. So what about dog people, Mike? When's the earliest reports and sightings of dog people?
Well, it seems that they've been around for a few hundred years at the very least, but they were talked about. I guess it was apparently a, a legend from Greece initially, but they were said to be a tribe of dog-headed people that dog people that were native to Africa and India, but they were known as the Kynocephali, or maybe it's Cynocephali, but it's derived from the Greek word uh, kephalos, which means head, and kuan. I'm butchering that. I know I am, but that means dog. So it literally the name means dog head.
Now, these things that we're talking about, they literally just have the body of a human and the head of a dog. It's like these weird monster races. I love these monster races, like the Blimye we've talked about plenty. And there's other writings and bestiaries where they show people that have like their legs are fused together, only to be met with like a giant 3 foot wide foot and all these weird creatures. But the dog-headed men have a super rich history. I mean, not just Greece. It's written about all over the world, basically.
Yeah, and not only that, but it's talked about in a lot of Christian writings as well. Saint Augustine, Saint Andrew, and Saint Bartholomew all wrote about men with dog heads, and they were even said to be the descendants of Adam. And in some stories, they weren't the descendants of Adam; they were just the descendants of Cain. And later, they were the descendants of Noah's children who went astray after the flood. And in the Christian mythology, if these beings are baptized, then they lose their dog face and they become human in appearance.
Oh, wow. That's
And there's
interesting.
even the story of Saint Christopher. He Saint Christopher is kind of a questionable character anyway. He's known as the patron saint of travelers, but he whether he was someone that actually existed is questionable. And I guess even in recent times, the Catholic Church has called into question whether he is still alive, or if he actually was alive at one point or not. But he, according to his legend, he started off as this guy named, or as this thing named Reprobus. Before I go on, can we just reflect on how cool of a name Reprobus is? Doesn't that sound like a villain from a comic book or something?
Yeah, that sounds like a pissed off robot.
Yeah, I are Reprobus.
I shall reprobe you.
Oh no, you had to take it that far.
It's not like I wasn't gonna.
Let's leave the probing out of this one.
It's in the name. I had to.
I think it was to call it, basically calling him a reprobate, but he's Reprobus. But he was a Canaanite who was said to be about 7.5 feet tall, and he had a fearsome face. And in some translations, instead of Canaanite, which means he came from Canaan, that it was a word tying to canines that would like literally, I can't remember what the word itself was, but it literally means dog person, but it's similar to Canaanite. So there's a lot of these old depictions of Saint Christopher as a saint with an actual dog head.
Yeah, I've seen the paintings, and I never read into it, but that's who that is, huh? It's literally a
Yeah,
saint with their hand up and everything, but it's just
yeah,
like a German Shepherd.
yeah, kind of. But he was serving the king of Canaan, and he decided that he was going to serve the greatest king there ever was. And so he goes to the king, and this king is reputed to be the greatest in the land, and nobody could stand against this king. He was the most baddest ass of all kings. And one day Reprobus saw him make the sign of the cross when someone mentioned the devil. So because of that, he learned that the king feared the devil. So Reprobus went in search of the devil. And along his journeys, he came across this group of criminals and thieves. And one of them told him that he was, in fact, the devil. So Reprobus decided he would serve him, because if the devil could make the most baddest ass of all kings afraid, then clearly the devil was more powerful than this king. So Reprobus said that he was going to serve him, and as he was hanging out with the devil, they came across a crucifix, which seemed to freak out the devil. So then Reprobus realized that the devil was afraid of Jesus. And so he's like, fuck you, devil. I'm going to go find this Jesus guy, because he's the most baddest ass of all badasses that have ever batted an ass. So he goes in search of Jesus. And along his journeys, he finds a hermit who teaches him about the Christian faith. So Reprobus asks this old hermit how he could go and serve Jesus, and he was told about prayer and fasting, and Reprobus was basically like, fuck that, I'm not gonna do that shit. So the hermit's like, well, you're big and clearly strong, so maybe you could serve Jesus and God by helping people cross this dangerous river. A lot of people have been crossing this river and drowning and being swept away by the rapids. And Reprobus was like, hey, you know what? I could do that. That's a good idea.
Oh, like rivers?
Yeah, I'm strong. I could carry people. So he goes down to the river, and he's basically the river taxi. And one day this little kid comes up to him and asks him to take him across the river. So Reprobus lifts little Timmy up on his back and carries him across the river. But as he was crossing, there was like a flood in the river, and the river rose, and the child became super heavy, like fucking boulder on Reprobus's shoulder. And it got to the point where he could barely carry Timmy across the river. And finally he was able to reach the other side, and he said to Timmy that Timmy put him in a lot of danger, and he doesn't know if he's ever felt anything as heavy as the kid. And the kid replies to him that not only did you have me on your shoulders, but you had the entire world, just like my father, basically. And he's like, I'm Jesus, and you carried me across the river, and now you're not Reprobus anymore. And he became Christopher, which I guess is literally means Christ bearer. And that's how he became Saint Christopher. And according to legend, he was later martyred. And the local king in Lycia called him forward and told him to worship his pagan gods. And Christopher's like, fuck you. I got Jesus, motherfucker. And the king was like, how about I pay you lots of money and you can bang these two beautiful women? And Christopher, knowing that that's not what Jesus would want, decided instead to convert these sexy women to Christianity. And then he started converting others in the city. King got pissed off and ordered him to be killed. No one seemed to be able to kill him, but finally Christopher was captured and decapitated.
Oh.
And upon his decapitation, it was found that he had a human. No, I'm just adding that part. Apparently, when he converted to Christ, he lost his dog head and became a regular human.
That's weird, man.
Yeah,
I do like it as a story, though.
St. Christopher. Yeah, it's a fun story. Dog-headed man saves people from drowning in the river. I like it.
Now, I love the dog-headed men because you can find them in writings almost anywhere. Does the more man than dog aspect make it any more real for you, or could it have been more real than just like a werewolf or these other things?
No. Nope. I don't believe it for a second. I think it's the same type of thing as the Blamier. But I'll get into that. I will get into my debunking of the dog heads.
Okay. Because I've got examples from where people talk about them in writings. I mean, even Herodotus passes on reports about the Libyans. The Libyans wrote about dog-headed men that lived, but they also reported headless men, the Blamier. But you just think it's just some made-up thing. I mean, these things. Do you think these things could have existed and they were cold or something like that? Because they show up everywhere.
There's a lot of people that have talked about them, but I think there's a reason why, and if you look at the locations where a lot of them were said to have been, most of them are India and Africa, which at the time were we didn't know very much. We knew that the people that lived there, and I say we, I mean Europeans. What they knew about it at the time was that the people that lived there looked different than how we look. And they started writing about these stories, just like any time there's these unexplored lands that are being explored now, like the what the hell is it? The creatures of the lumberwoods. During the frontier time, the lumberjacks would go out into these forests that no European has ever been in before, and they're cutting their way through. And so they're making all these stories. And then when we were first going over to Africa, and there were a lot of reports from Alexander the Great of these crazy, even Alexander the Great had written about the Dogmen that lived in Africa.
I actually read that Jason and his Argonauts were supposed to have had a battle with some in Siberia. Really? Yeah.
In Siberia.
Yeah.
Wow. See what I mean? Like these huge unexplored areas. Like when the Europeans started going to South America and exploring over there and going through like Percy Fawcett. Remember, he's reporting all these crazy things that are being seen, and then when people would start sailing away to go to these places, there'd be all those stories of creatures living in the ocean. I just feel like it's just kind of what we do. We just make up these stories to make the journey seem more fearsome than it really was, seem more dangerous than it really was, and to make these foreign lands seem more mystical than they really are.
Yeah.
Like we went over there and it's kind of like it is here. It's just the trees are a little different and the weather's nicer. No one wants to hear that.
No.
Like they want to hear we went there and we battled men with a single eye in their chest and no head and one giant foot.
Yeah.
I want to hear stories of giants and fucking monsters.
I definitely get that feel a little bit when it comes to dog-headed men. Like I just envision in my mind this Harryhausen, But it definitely feels like a old 60s sci-fi movie sometimes, going into a distant land. There's a possibility that something like that could be true because they're the only motherfuckers that been there. Yeah, there's dog-headed man. Have you been there?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's just like it's just a way to embellish the story more. Make it seem greater than it really was. But there are other people that have talked about it too, like this Greek writer Stesius, I think is how you say his name. But he mentioned about the dogmen living in India, and he said that there were men that had the head of a dog, and they wore the skins of wild beasts as their clothing, and they didn't speak a language. But they would bark like dogs to each other, but that they could understand the Indian language. So he's differentiating them between the Indian people and this race because they can't speak the same language. And he says that their teeth are larger than those of a dog, their nails like those of these animals, but longer and rounder. And they inhabit the mountains as far as the river Indos.
Wow.
And he says that they're completely black.
Do they have a body of a man?
Yeah.
Oh,
body
wow.
of a man, but a dog head. And he says that they live on raw meat only. That's all they eat. And that there's 120,000 of them.
Holy shit. He gives a number that's kind of specific.
Yeah.
That's weird.
And he said that they don't trade at all, and they make their living solely by hunting. And after they kill an animal, they'll lay it out in the sun, and that's how they cook it, and then they eat it. But he said that they also raise their own livestock, such as sheep, goats, and donkeys, and they drink the milk of sheep.
Wow, that's pretty bizarre to hear about writing about these things and have such a level of detail. This guy's including a diet. This is crazy.
Yeah. And he mentioned how skilled they are in God damn, I can't fucking talk. He talks about how skilled they are at war. And he says that they use bows, arrows, and are extremely proficient with a spear. And he said because of their skill at hunting, they can't be defeated at war. And they live in inaccessible areas in the mountains so they can defend themselves and no army would be able to defeat them. And he even mentions that every 5 years, the king in this area of India will send them a present of 300,000 bows and spears and shields and swords just to keep peace with them. He gives them a present.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember reading something about how Paul the Deacon, who was a 7th century Benedictine monk, he wrote about how some armies would spread rumors that they had dog-headed men hired as infantry among the ranks.
The Lombards of Sicily actually did that when they were taking over Sicily, so that they wouldn't. Do you know? Are you familiar with the Lombards at all?
No.
All right. They're basically a group. They were a group of settlers and soldiers from northern Italy that came down to the eastern part of Sicily during the Norman conquest of the island, and they're the minority in Sicily. And as a result of being the minority, and in order to be able to stake out their own land, they had to, basically they started conquering areas. And in order to freak out the areas they were going to be attacking, they started this rumor that they had an infantry of dogmen. And upon hearing of these dogmen, the armies would freak out, and a lot of them would surrender before the battle even began, so they wouldn't have to face the dogmen.
I wonder if they use dogmen as something new to scare people, or it's something that everybody knew about.
Well, at this point, the dogmen had been known about for a while. Stesius was from when he wrote about them, that was the 2nd century BC. And the Lombards, well, the Norman conquest of Sicily was in the 11th century.
Yeah, there's even that Greek historian and traveler, Megasthenes. I don't know. Did you read about him at all?
No.
He wrote about dog-headed men that lived in India too. So we're coming up with the same place again.
Yeah, it seems like that was kind of the general consensus, is that they were in India and parts of Africa. In the 2nd century, there was an author, I think his name was Aelian. It's Aelian. But he had a work that he published. It was apparently Greek natural history, but it was called On Animals. And he mentions that in India, there are, he actually calls them kynocephaloi, which I guess means dog heads as well. And he says they're called kynocephali because their physical appearance and their nature, and that they have the shape of a human, the head of a dog. And again, he mentions that they dress in the skins of beasts that they've killed. But he, in his take on them, he said they injure no man. So he say they don't attack people. And but he also mentions that they don't have a language of their own, but they will howl, but they understand the Indian language. And he does mention that wild animals are their food and they'll catch them very easily. And he also mentions that they're very fast, but basically a lot of the things that he says repeat what Ctesias said 4 centuries earlier, because this was in the 2nd century that he wrote about them. But in the same book, he also writes about them being in Egypt. And he said there's a stretch of desert that on foot it would take 7 days to cross. But once you pass through this desert, you come upon, how does he say it? Kynoprosopoi, which means dog faces, not dog heads.
Huh.
But he says that these creatures live by hunting gazelles and antelopes, and that they are all black in appearance and have the head and teeth of a dog. But he says also in Egypt that they don't have speech of their own, and they communicate with these shrill squeals. Then he says beneath their chin is a beard, and they have strong nails that cover their hands, and their whole body is covered with hair, but they're human in shape.
Now that sounds more like a werewolf than a dog-headed man now.
To me, it sounds more like a depiction of Anubis with a pharaoh's beard.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah. But even Pliny the Elder talks about them as well in Natural History 6.
No shit.
Yeah. And he says from Ethiopia, he calls them Medimini, and he said they're a nomadic tribe that lives on the milk of the cynocephali.
Huh? What? They suck on the titties of other dogmen? Dog-headed men?
No, the nomadic tribe sucks on the titty of the dog-faced man.
Whoa,
or I guess in this case, the dog-faced woman.
Ew. Oh, God.
And then he later mentions that there are some regions of Africa that are purely imaginary. But then he says towards the west of Ethiopia are dog milkers who have dogs' heads.
Wow. Now, isn't it weird for him to mention that some of the stuff you'll read about this place is bullshit, but these dog-faced people, that's legit.
It seems weird. I don't know.
I don't know. This is getting more convincing, man.
Yeah. And he also mentions in Natural History 7 that there's mountains in India where there's a tribe of human beings with dog heads who wear a covering of wild beast skins and whose speech is a bark. And they live on they live by hunting. He says they sew their nails as weapons, which I guess would mean file their nails as weapons. And when he wrote about it, he said that they numbered more than 120,000 at the time of the work being published.
Whoa. That's scary, man. I mean, I don't know. Like I said, this is becoming more of a plausible thing. If they're taking so many notes on these things and they're so well documented, and I mean to talk about their diet and their numbers, and even people paying homage to them so they fuck off. That's weird. This even maybe they didn't have dog fucking faces, but maybe they're just some gnarly super tribe. But why throw in the dog face stuff? Why throw in the dog face stuff? Why have so many different descriptions that say the same thing? They didn't say hairy men, because there's writings of hairy men coming from these periods of time. There's, they're saying dog-faced people, dog-headed people.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a few possibilities there. The first is that at the time of a lot of these writings, common depiction for cannibals were humans with a dog's head. And one theory is that these people were basically writing about cannibals when they were writing, and people at the time would have known what that meant. And I think talking about them not being able to speak in a language but speaking in barks and howls is just a way to further dehumanize these people, whoever they were, this group of people. And in areas that we don't know about, especially in areas where there's a tribal society, like in a lot of the countries in Africa that they would have encountered, I think it's just kind of a way to create a boogeyman type scenario. Like, oh, you don't want to go into the jungles there without guides because that's where the doghead men live and they'll fucking skin you alive and eat you.
I don't know, man. Hearing the stuff that you say, and reading stuff like, records from China, from the Liang dynasty, which reigned from 502 to 587, talk about a place they call the island of dog-headed men. And then in the history of the Northern dynasty, written in 643, talks about the kingdom of the dogs. So it seems like there was almost like a kingdom of their own established, because it's almost one right after the other. It's weird, man. There's a lot of, I don't know.
Yeah, there's a Buddhist missionary that talks about the island of the Dogmen.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's from the Chinese record History of the Liang Dynasty, and the Buddhist missionary Hui Sheng describes an island that has it's ruled by dog-headed men.
Wow.
And apparently this missionary claims to have visited this area, but there's speculation that the island that he's talking about was Japan. So, but that's not the only. There's another Chinese story, the history of I shouldn't say story. Another document that it's called the History of Northern Dynasties, and one of the Tang Dynasty historians also mentions a dog kingdom.
Yeah. That's the second one that I mentioned. And it's right after this island's talked about. It seems like that island progressed into a kingdom. It's weird. And the second, the history of the Northern Dynasty, when I looked that up, it says it was like a non-state commission book. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't, there's no rules to them writing it. They just wrote what was there.
There's also, do you remember when we did the show on Lake Baikal?
Yeah.
There was a medieval traveler, Giovanni del Carpine, and he was writing about the armies of Ogadai Khan, and apparently the Khan's army encountered a race of dog heads who came from Lake Baikal.
Whoa.
And even Marco Polo writes about them. He mentioned that there were dog-headed barbarians on the island of, well, I don't know how to pronounce what it is, but it's the Andaman Islands now, which is between India and Myanmar, so in the same area of the world.
That's crazy.
I don't know whether or not he actually claims to have been there, but when he's talking about them in the book, he said that they grow spices, but they're cruel people, and that they have bodies of people, but their heads are like big mastiff dogs.
Damn. I don't know, man. I'm convinced. I think this is a race of people. I don't think this is something to keep people out of the woods at night.
But all this stuff is being talked about in a time period that we have all sorts of relics from. So where the fuck are the bodies and the skeletons of these dog people?
Wouldn't they just be mistaken for dogs? I mean, a human skeleton without a head wouldn't be uncommon in any of these time periods.
Yeah, but you'd have to think that the structure of the spine and everything would be different to fit on a dog's head as opposed to a human's head. And wouldn't it be weird to find like a burial with a human body and a dog's head? What happened to the human's head? What happened to the dog's body?
I don't know. Maybe I can see that being chalked up to some type of ritual.
Yeah, but that would be a thing that you'd be able to find. Like, that's not like that's a discovery that would be hidden. You know, that would be a published discovery. That would be something that would be really interesting to historians. Like, why did we find this gravesite with human bodies and dog heads? You know, if anything, if these stories are real, then I think it's probably more a case of a tribe wearing masks.
That could be possible.
And especially if you're thinking of the stories from Stesius, where he's talking about them being unbeatable in battle and living on the mountains and ambushing people that tried to attack them. You got to think they're probably doing guerrilla warfare, and it would be a thing where you just would see the attack and then they'd be gone. You know, they're not going to stand and fight on a mountain. They're going to be picking them off one by one, and chances are they're not going to get a good look at the people, and they're just going to see these dog masks.
But what about the whole eating people thing? Do you think they're all even in all the places they're talked about?
Well, most of the writings say that they eat wildlife and they don't eat people.
There's a creature that from Bosnia called a Paskulav. I'm sorry, I'm terrible at pronouncing stuff. Psoglav. But they said that they feasted on human bodies, and if they ran out of human bodies, they'd dig them out of a goddamn grave.
So like ghouls.
Yeah, to eat them.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff could be myth, and hearing stuff like that. I mean, there's even a story about a Frankish king who said while he was in the court of Charlemagne that he was greatly saddened that he never got to battle any dog-headed men. But there's this Frankish monk and a theologian, Rataramnus, I guess is how you'd say it. But he wrote a whole goddamn book about them being real creatures, and them existing, and if we should treat them as Christians and teach them about Jesus. I mean, that's a lot of fucking interaction. That's Skyrim cat people shit.
Well, yeah, but that was also the Christian belief that if they could baptize them, then they would turn human again.
Yeah, that's true.
And that shit was spread by St. Augustine for the most part. He used them kind of as an example to show how strong the power of God's salvation could be. And they were his example. Like even the lowly Dogman, if he accepts God in his life, he will become human again.
Yeah, no kidding. Did you hear about that tribe up north of those dog people? Worship Jesus. Human face. Poof.
Jesus saved the shit out of them.
Save their face.
No, they don't look like bulldogs anymore. They look like beautiful European humans.
Yeah, man.
Just like Jesus.
I don't know, man. There's so much evidence. I mean, there's more fucking documentation on this than Atlantis, and people are still looking for that shit.
The thing is, there's no evidence. There's zero evidence.
Well, documentation
There's
anyway.
historical texts that mention dogmen, but a lot of historical texts at the time also believed in dragons and that their gods were actual beings that visited Earth and hung out.
I don't know. I'm going with the theory that they just got slaughtered. They were just cold. I mean,
then where's the bodies, Mateo? Where are they?
They burnt them. Imagine these guys got the body of people and the head of a dog, and that means they got the intellect of a dog. You roll up with 50, 75 fully armored knights and a bag of squirrels. It's easy. Throw some sticks. It's over.
But the bodies.
They fucking burned them. They're evil creatures. They're misformations of nature. They just burnt them all.
I'm sorry, but I disagree. And let me tell you some reasons why, Mateo.
Well, hold on. They do the same thing to vampires, though, right? I mean, that's what you do.
Yeah,
to evil shit.
There's more evidence for vampires if you really want to get down to it.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, there's actual skeletons with sticks or rocks stuffed in their mouth and nails through their body, pinning them to their coffins.
Yeah.
There's no dogmen. What did they die and then they had a priest give them last rites, and upon giving last rites, their head and skull reverted to a human? A lot of so there's more theories than just the cannibal theory. And one theory is that it was Europeans seeing baboons for the first time on the coast of Africa. So much so do I believe this, but the Greeks actually named baboons cynocephaly.
Really?
That's the Greek word for baboons. Because they look like little men with dog heads. But there's also a theory that they were, when talking about these dogmen in Africa, were referring to this big species of lemur called the Indri lemur. And the Indri lemur stands 3 feet high, and they don't have a tail, but their head looks like a dog. And when you see them standing on their hind legs, they look very much like a human, like a little human with a dog head.
I don't know. I think this is Sandhill Crane with Mothman shit. I mean, these people are talking about...
Because there's kind of a precedence for this. There's actually a tribe, the Betsamaraka tribe of Madagascar, that fear and worship the Indri lemur. They call it the Babakado, which means the child grandfather. They believe that it's a descendant of men who would hide in the forest to avoid working. And when they died, they became these child grandfathers. And so in a lot of ways, that's like the whole St. Augustine thing, with St. Augustine saying that they were descended from Cain and the disobedient children of Noah, basically saying that they were people who were bad and they came back as either dogmen or child grandfather, Babakado. So I'm not buying the dog head being alive thing.
It's just odd though to hear about the baboon thing and then hear about them, being paid homage to. I mean, I don't see a bunch of Greek dudes or anybody walking up a hill and throwing, weapons that cost money to make, that were hard to make, up a hill to some fucking monkeys.
Yeah.
I don't see anybody.
I think some others of the stories could be just misunderstanding or misinterpretation of things that are being read. Like going back to Stesius, there was a book written about Stesius who I think I mentioned, but he lived in the second century BC. And there was a book written by David Gordon White called Myths of the Dogman that mentioned Stesius talking about these dogmen from India. And it's believed that Stesius thought he was reporting about actual facts from India. But based on a lot of the other things he wrote, it seems that he was misunderstanding Indian myths and reporting them as actual real things that occurred or existed in India.
Yeah, I can buy that more than them being mistaken for another animal. I don't see them mistaking a lemur for us. But most of the time they're like
But I
what,
mean, maybe
7 feet
from a
tall?
boat or whatever. Like if you're seeing them, you're on a boat and you're looking on the beach and you see these things walking around on hind legs from a distance, it would look like they had a dog head.
Do
And
lemurs
that they were,
do lemurs eat other small animals like that? Are they?
I think they eat like lizards and shit. Maybe I don't know. I
Hmm.
really don't know. But going back to what I was saying about the dog-headed person being a representative for cannibals, there's a guy named Gregory McIntosh who's actually a expert on medieval maps. And you know, if you look at any medieval maps, there's always like really cool monsters on the maps.
Mm-hmm.
And he was doing a presentation talking about maps, and he mentioned that the that cannibals were often depicted as dog-headed men. So dog-headed men appeared on several maps and on medieval maps, and it was thought to be basically a warning that that's where cannibals lived.
Hmm.
And the ancient Persians had a tradition of leaving their dead exposed to be eaten by dogs and other scavengers. And so that kind of gave dogs the tie-in with the cannibals because of their consumption of the human flesh. So that's how it kind of got tied in together. And he thinks a lot of these stories come from this symbolism.
Yeah, I can see that getting lost in translation.
Yeah. Yeah, like I mean, there's a lot of things that get lost in translation. I'm sure a lot of the while we know a lot of the stuff about hieroglyphs and things like that, I'm sure a lot of it gets lost to us. You know, maybe some stuff we're reading as myth, but it's really just symbolism. And someone at the time would read it and know exactly what it means, but we're reading it looking at a different meaning.
Hmm. That's completely possible.
Yeah. Or who knows? Maybe he fucking lives in the woods of the United States now and scares campers and gives Bigfoot a bad name.
Do you think that these dog-headed men, you know, like you said, there's a couple places that reported them being all black in color, even their human-like body. Do you think that dog-headed men that get ripped are dogmen, werewolf ones that fight Bigfoot?
Maybe. Maybe they just send the really shredded ones to the US and they're like, all right, go. Hunt that motherfucker down.
Don't come back without a fucking Bigfoot head.
And the war continues. Dogman and Bigfoot, head to head for eternity. Maybe, you know what? Maybe this all spawns back to ancient Egypt. Maybe, you know, we still don't understand how the pyramids were built, but maybe there was a civilization of Bigfoot that lived in Egypt, and they were responsible for building the pyramids. And that's why we don't have any record of how it was built, because it was all Bigfoot engineers developing this huge structure.
Well, with all the weird things we find in hieroglyphics, don't you think we'd find one Bigfoot hieroglyphic or statue or...
No, because it predated
Ah,
the dynasties. There
Okay.
had to have been a few generations of humans living there before dynastic rule came into effect. And I think these early people were learning from this Bigfoot civilization, and eventually either the Bigfoot civilization moved on or got killed off or banged out of existence. You know, they bred with the ancient Egyptians, and then they had Anubis come in, who was the judge at death, and him and his dogmen always fought against the Sam Squatch. But once the humans came, Bigfoot left, leaving only the dogmen. And the dogmen were like, "Oh, these humans are pussies. We don't even have to fight them. Let's just tell them we're gods." And then they told the humans that they were gods, and the humans believed it. And they were like, "Hey, see those pretty sweet pyramids over there? We totally built that." And they're like, "Oh shit, Dogman is the man."
That's why we find statues of those.
Yeah, and we're completely misunderstanding the significance of Anubis. We think that he weighs the heart against the feather, but no, he rips the heart out of the pharaoh with a feather because that's how badass he is. And then he throws it on a scale and laughs while the pharaoh dies. And that's what they're depicting. He's not weighing his fucking heart against a feather. He's murdering fools because he's Anubis, the badass. Dogman. Defeater of Bigfoot and builder of pyramids.
Would you agree that there's way more writings and documentation on these things than any other monster race, any humanoid monster race?
Humanoid monster race, maybe. But, well, I guess it all depends on what you consider monster, because there's plenty of writings about the Nephilim.
That's true.
Lots of writings about demons and all the yokai.
But not, I mean, these guys are supposed to be physical creatures. No spiritual or, you know, non-corporeal, I don't know, any type of ghost or anything. Those things need not apply. But these creatures these races of weird people. I mean, like, you've seen the bestiary pictures where they have like regular humans that have a tiny elephant trunk instead of a nose, and these weird people that look like they're like a weird pod, like the shape of a seed, but they have a bearded dude's head on it and shit. There's just tons
I
of
love
them.
that shit.
Me too. And they're
so awesome.
Dog-headed men are always in there too.
Yeah. But again, I think that is symbolism, because I mean, really think about it. A man with the head of a dog is that's fearsome, man. That's pretty bad. And in a lot of cultures, the dog represents a scavenger. You know, if you go back before, or if you go to a culture that hadn't domesticated dogs yet, there's coyotes, jackals, wolves, always.
Yeah, there's always some type of wild dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I looked at a map, no matter what fucking language it was in, and I see a picture of a dude with a dog's head, that means don't go there.
Yeah, it might as well be skull and crossbones.
Yeah, exactly. That means whatever's there has the capabilities that you do, but are on some unknown level more ferocious.
Or they just want to eat you.
Yeah, that as well. That's automatically included in your visit.
Hey kids, have you ever wanted to be a cannibal victim? Well, now you can. Come to the mountains of India and face the fearsome Dogman. Bobby, I want to go to India. You're too young, Junior. Maybe when you're older. Oh, Ma.
They like their meat aged. Fear not.
I don't know. I bet children would be way more delicious than adults.
Oh, I'm sure.
I'm sure we taste like shit.
No.
I wouldn't want to eat me.
No.
I mean, maybe if I was really hungry and you know, it was a survival situation, I'd take a look at my leg. I'd be like, you know what? Maybe.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe one of these days, leg.
Yeah, I mean, there's all these survival stories, way off subject, but you hear about people cutting off their arm to get out of situations and shit like that.
I mean, if you're gonna cut it off, you might as well eat it.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a situation where some dude was like, "Fuck, now I'm still here. I got to eat my arm now."
Yeah, I cut my arm off, and now I'm out from under that rock. But I'm still at the bottom of a fucking mountain. What am I gonna do? Guess I gotta eat my arm.
Oh, that would suck. You can't even cook it first.
You could cook it. You'd have to be able to build a fire with one arm, though.
Yeah. What if you cut it off and it flew into a nearby fire and you're like, oh, it smells good.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If you're fucking starving and you smell meat cooking, you know what? It's pretty fucking tasty. Better than letting it rot.
Dog-headed man would feel the same.
Yeah, dog-head approves.
Thank you for listening to the Whatcast. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, iTunes, and YouTube. Enjoy the podcast. Get yourself a Whatcast t-shirt or a sticker pack. Who was that dude on that one episode? Try the links in Homie's page. All this and more can be found at www.thewhatcasters.com. Thanks again for listening and have a great week.